Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about sketching, constraints, dimensions, and how all of those apply to your drawing. We're going to start actually drawing objects, and so that'll help you get going with your 13 isometrics. Speaking of your 13 isometrics, when you come through here and we're going to open ISO 1, you'll notice I changed mine from isometrics to isometrics 2. It was just something that I had to do because of a glitch I had. But so when you see me in ISO 2, you don't need to change anything. It's just where I am. When you open yours up, it'll open you up in model space, in 3D space, however you want to look at it. But we want to get into sketch space. And so before we do that, what I want to do is I want to take my drawing, split the screen with it, and then I'm just going to drag it over here. So it's it's not even really split screened, but so it's half screen, a little more, a little less. I'm going to open up that ISO 8 that I had, or ISO 7, wherever the most recent version is. We're going to take it, drag that into the side, and I'm going to make that nice and small, just small enough where I can see the dimensions, so I can have both things on my screen at the same time. This will help you not have to work off of your phone all of the time, because it's hard to see your dimensions from your phone, but it's up to you if you want to do that, I guess. You could do that with the video is the point. You could put the video over here playing so that you can see it, and then you can take the video and you can kind of open it up and then shrink it back down and make your life a little bit easier. So, all right. So now we have our object. We're going to go to Start 2D Sketch. We're going to choose the XY plane because we're going to put our front view right on here. And now we're ready to start sketching. The way we sketch is, the first thing we might learn might be the line tool. You can click the line button, or you can see if you hold your mouse over the top of a button, it'll start to reveal some of the things you might want to know about it. The first one is the shortcut for the line tool is just clicking the L button, which it says right next to line, and then there's some hints as to what you might want to do. So I click a line by clicking the button, or I can hit L, and it'll draw that, and that's great, and I'm going to get rid of those two. I want the circle command, which you'll notice the shortcut for circle should be C, but it's not. It's Control-Shift-C, which is pretty much the worst shortcut ever, but it exists, and so I thought I'd tell you. As you start moving around your screen, you notice a couple things. One is when you first open your object, there is a yellow dot in the middle. What it does is it starts you with a point. It's just like an object on the screen that you can snap to. We're going to talk about the difference between hard snaps and soft snaps. So a soft snap is something that, if you see, as I'm in the line command, I have a yellow dot on my cursor. And if I grab, it'll snap to stuff. And if it stays yellow, it's telling me that that's a soft snap. So if I click, it'll grab that line. I'm sure it's on that line. But if I go to the moved command, and then I select my object, and then I choose my base point, and I choose my center point, it'll let me move it. If I go and I go on top of this dot, it won't let me move it. So if I click, it turns green. So it grabs, so here it's yellow the whole way, and as soon as I get to that point that's in the middle of my origin, if I click and I pull off, and then I go to the move command, and I choose my object, and choose base point, and choose right here, it won't let me move that, and it gives me an error message. It says the selected geometry could not be moved. Check constraint settings for sketch edit tools. Okay, so I'll hit cancel. And so what I want to do is I want to figure out why it won't let me move it. Now I know it's not going to let me move it because I just made a hard constraint. It turned my cursor green, so you know it's holding you back from doing something you might want to do. So if you right click and you go to show all constraints, it'll show you what constraints are on there, and it's going to show this object right here, which is a shortcut for a constraint, which I think we can see all of our constraints up here. But that one is like a point constraint, a coincident constraint. So if I right click on that and I go to delete, it'll get rid of the point, and then the constraint that I want was underneath it. So you see that this is our coincident constraint. So I can right click on this, click delete, and now either I can click on my object and grab my center point and pull. Right? So that'll let me do that, because this one here I can now too. But that soft constraint that hard constraint has now moved to a soft constraint, and I can more easily move my object around because that point is now gone. So I'm just deleting that point, which I just moved a minute ago. Okay, so there's my object. Now I'm able to move it, and that's good. So let's get rid of both of these things. Let's do a little bit of sketching, and let's talk about sketching our object here. So I'm going to go back to the size that I had that I can see my object. So let's put that point back on. We should be able to just put a point on. We'll skip that. If I can do it quickly. See if I can pop on that. Forget it. We'll skip it. All right, so let's go through and we're going to start drawing our object. So if I grab the line command, one of the big ways that Inventor is different from AutoCAD is if I draw my line, in Inventor, you just sketch. You just start drawing objects a certain size, click, 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 and there's my object. And then I dimension and I constrain it into place. Now, I'm not saying you have to do it this way. You can do it the AutoCAD way. You can go to line, and you can click up, and I can make this 1.25, right, which it will do. And when it does, it automatically puts a dimension on there, which means that I can't change the size of this. Like, I can't just grab and change that. It'll move the whole object, but it won't change the dimension. Whereas if I did this, if I went and just drew it on here, didn't give it a dimension, I could grab my line and I could just pull the line. And the reason it won't let you do that is because a dimension is the same as a constraint. Once a dimension is on there, the only way you can change it is by changing the dimension. So if I grab my dimension, I put it on there, and now it won't let me change it. I can grab it, it won't let me pull, moves the whole line, but it won't move the dimension. I can double click on the dimension and go 2, and it will make it bigger. See what I'm saying? So whereas in AutoCAD, when you put those things in place, they're kind of like hard into place, where these are much more pliable. You can change them as you go, and there are benefits and negatives to that as well. You'll see once you start trying to mess with dimensions and constraints in Inventor, lots of times there's a constraint on there that you can't find, you can't figure it out, you don't know why it won't let you do the thing you want to do, and that can be frustrating. So let's go back to drawing our object here. We'll make this 1.25 just because that's the size it needs to be, and then we'll have that in place, and so we have a dimension on there. So we'll go back to the line. Yeah, let's erase this and start over, because it'll prove my point to something later. Let's do this in one shot here. So let's go line, click and put a soft constraint on my origin there. We'll go whatever. Let's just make it kind of like we talked about, just any random size. Click it into place. Great. Now I can go through and I can start dimensioning it. So I can grab the dimension tool, pull this off, 1.25. I can make this one 1.5. Make this one 2.75. And then this last one is 0.75. And there we go, I have my object. Relatively simple. The other thing is, what it's going to say on the bottom, it says 2 dimensions needed. As you're working your way through, so I'm just going to undo this a bit. See, I drew my object, and it says, here's my object. It says 6 dimensions to fully constrain it, which honestly, it's really kind of subjective as to when it's fully constrained, but it tells you we need 6. So as I'm going to redo this. So as I put them back on, that 6 changes from a 5 to a 4 to a 3 to a 2. It looks like down to 2, right? So I've got all of them on here except for 2. Where those 2 are, I don't necessarily know, but the goal is to be able to take my object and not be able to move it, right? So it's got a hard constraint on here. It's not going to let me pull it left. Oh, it will, right? So it'll let me pull it left, but I can't really move it at a diagonal. I'm moving my actual constraints in there, which isn't the best, but so that's on there. So what those 2 are, I don't know. Maybe it wants it on here, but most likely if I try to put it on here, it's going to tell me I'm over constraining it. So like if I put it on here, it's going to say I'm over constraining it, so it's not going to let that happen. So I don't know what 2 it wants. That's why I'm saying it's kind of subjective. Doesn't always work the way that you want. Also, if I knew this dimension, which I don't necessarily know, I don't need to know it to draw it. If I delete this out, let's just say I wanted to dimension this angle and I wanted, the hypotenuse dimension of it. If I hold my mouse on it and I just pull, it pulls me off either vertically or it pulls me off horizontally. If I want it to come off at an angle, if I hold my mouse over, see as I bring my mouse down, there's a little icon that shows next to my mouse. That's like a line and a double-sided arrow right next to it. And what that's saying is if I click right now, it'll pull it off as an angled dimension. So if I right-click and I pull, you see that 1.83, which I guess is what it would be, would go on there, and that also gets me down to 2 dimensions. All right, but that's not really the one I want. I don't need it. I'm going to put the one that should be on there back on. So click here, click there, and this was supposed to be 0.75. So 0.75, and we're good. All right, I'm going to move this back down to my center point here just because when I make my front view, it'll make life a little bit easier for me. So I'm going to go M-Enter, choose all of my stuff. Oh, M-Enter, I keep forgetting, is measure. So I need move. Sorry, in AutoCAD, M-Enter is move. So click here, click our base point, and let's put this back at 0, 0. Which it does not want to snap to right now, but for now, we'll just get as close as we can. All right, so there's my object. let's talk some more about different ways we can dimension and what those dimensions mean. If you notice, as I put them on, all of these dimensions keep constraints keep showing up, and they all mean something. So the first thing is talking about how constraints go on. Inferred constraints. Let's change that. Let's talk about regular constraints, and then we'll talk about inferred constraints. So I'm just going to move over here to some space, and I'm going to click a line, and then I'll click another line. I'll hit enter to stop it, enter to start it again, and I have two objects here. The way Inventor works is that if I want these two lines to be parallel to one another, I can come up here to the parallel constraint. If I hold my mouse on there, it says parallel. So I can click on it, and I can click on this line and that line, and it will make them parallel. When it does, it puts two symbols on here. It puts a two-line symbol here and a two-line symbol there. And those two lines mean parallel. So if I click on my object, because right now I think show all constraints is on, so let's hide all constraints because it's showing them automatically. If I click on my line, it's going to show me there's a parallel constraint, and I'm going to draw another line here because it's hard to, what I'm trying to say is difficult to understand without the third line. But if I click on a line here, it says, and I click on it, it turns my line white, and if I hold my mouse on top of that double line, it's going to show me the other line that it's being parallel with. And if I click on this line, the parallel comes up, and same thing, the white doesn't. This one stays green because this parallel constraint isn't affecting this line, but it is affecting this one. So what can be hard as you get drawing larger and larger and more complicated drawings, trying to figure out where that parallel constraint is. If right now, so let's just say I have these two lines. Let's say I want to make them perpendicular. So I go to the perpendicular constraint, and I click on this line and that line. It's going to give me an error message. Well, what if I want them parallel? What if I can't figure out why it's not letting me do that? Which, in a really small situation where we only have two lines, it's easy to see. But the more lines you get, the harder that gets to see. So we'll say cancel. It's saying adding this constraint will over-constrain it, which we obviously don't want. If I wanted to make them perpendicular, I'd have to right-click on it, or click on it, right-click on that constraint, and then hit, whoops, that deleted the whole line. All right, click there. I think we have to hit show all constraints. So go to show all constraints. For some reason, it's not showing them. I don't know. It was showing them. Hide all constraints, show all constraints. Those two should have showed up. I don't know why they're not. So click on this again. Take it off. Oh, somehow we took it off. I don't know how we did that. Let's put it back on. Maybe I did delete it when I did that. So it's back on there again. So if I right-click and click on my line, that constraint shows up. If I click on that and I hit delete, now it deletes the constraint off like we originally wanted, and now I can take this line and I can get it to pivot the way I want it to pivot. If I want them to be perpendicular, I can click on that line, and it will make them perpendicular. It just thrust that line way up here to do that. Why it did that, I don't know, but it did, so it threw it way up here. But it is perpendicular. This line and this line are perpendicular. Even if it doesn't look that way, if I drag it down here, you see they are perpendicular. There's no way that I can move it. Even if I grab the tip and try to pull it around, it's not going to let me do that. So, two different types of constraints. There are a whole bunch. Another one that we could do is now, so those are two constraints that would not work together, right? Because they conflict. They counter, they're not intuitive. They don't work together. I could use what's called the coincident constraint, because whenever I'm making an object, it has to be like a full box. So if I take this object and I drag it over here and I get it really close, and I make a box and I try to extrude it, it's not going to let me do that. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in the next video, but I have to make sure that these lines are definitely touching, right? So what I can do is create the coincident constraint, and coincident you can do it two different ways. Click on your line, you can click point. Sorry, not really sure what happened there. But if we click point to point, it brings them together. I'm going to hit undo now. Or I can go coincident and I can go point and I can click anywhere on this line. So now the first way, go back to the first way. If I go the first way, it is going to guarantee that these 2 points are touching and that they stay together. If I move them, I create a situation where the end of each line is always on the end of each line. The other way, if I go coincident and I go end of the line to the line, all that's saying is that this line has to be touching this line from the endpoint to the line, somewhere on the line at all points. Does that make sense? So, and there's others here, and we'll talk about them as we go. Like another one might be collinear, right? Collinear is keeping these two lines in line. So if I click a line here, click on this line, click on that line, it didn't join them together. All it did was guarantee that somewhere in space, these two lines are lined up. So I can pull this wherever I want, but those two lines have to stay in the same plane, in the same line. Another one is concentric. Say I want to make sure that this line is touching the center point of this line. So if I click here, I can click on this point. Perhaps. Click on there. Okay, it's not a... Oh, it's got to be two circles. Sorry. There's a different one for that. I would have used coincident. Coincident should have been from this point to the center point. Concentric is two center points. So I should have made this a little smaller. Okay. But now if I make this one concentric with that one, guarantees that the two are sitting on top of each other at the same center point. All right. So that's you putting constraints on. There's also something called inferred constraints, which can be frustrating because you may not have chosen to put them on, but they're going on either way. So if I go to the line command and I click and I start to pull up, okay, and then I start to go a different direction and I start to draw, you'll notice that as I do, there's a perpendicular that shows up here. And so it just automatically puts it on without me really wanting necessarily for it to happen. And when it does, it automatically shows it there. I think if you have show all constraints on, it will go on. Oh no, because it was already there. So it just put that on automatically. So that's good. So that's there. So we'll go back to the line command. Click. Click. And you'll see it automatically puts that on. And then if I keep going, it comes up with another parallel. I'm going to click just here. And then see if I can get some other weird ones to show up maybe. Let's go there. And there, and I did. So as this one's here, you'll notice there's a parallel that shows up that makes that parallel. So these are when you're in a line of drawing. So I haven't stopped drawing. If I hit escape right now, escape, and I click the line tool again, and I click, and I draw, that same parallel doesn't show up anymore because I've started a new series of lines. It's only going to put those inferred ones on, those automatic ones on, when you're drawing like a whole string of lines. If you stop and start over, it won't. Now, if I want an easy way to make that happen, I can do what's called scrubbing the line. I can drag my mouse over and I can kind of rub on it. And now when I do, you see now the parallel shows up. You can also do that with your inferred constraints as you're drawing, but this would be another way. So as I'm drawing, I can scrub this one, come over here, and should make, oh, didn't like that this time. Sometimes it can be a little tricky getting it to, there it goes. See? So now that one and that one are parallel. So again, one of the tricks to the whole thing is being able to figure out where your constraints are, which one you're using, which one is stopping you from doing the thing that you want to do, and it can be confusing at times. One of the best things you can do is go to Show All Constraints. It'll show them all. Hold your mouse over that constraint, look at what those two are, and try to figure out how you're going to get it to do what you want it to do rather than what it's already doing. So, I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff. We'll have more opportunities to look at more things as we go. But that's quite a bit on dimensioning, sketching, constraints, and that's a big part of sketching. When you're done, hit Finish Sketch, right? So we have our object. Obviously, you're going to want to delete all of this. We should make ISO 1. Actually, no, ISO 1 is going to be in the next video. So I'm going to delete. Let's go back through. The other thing we didn't really talk about, I think it comes up in the next video also, but now that I'm outside of this and I've started a sketch, and if I want to go back in and let's say I want to delete these circles, it won't let me do it because I'm in 3D mode. If I want to delete them, I have to go back in to the browser bar. Actually, it's called the model bar now. Right-click on that and go to Edit Sketch. And so now I can delete all. So let's delete all of this stuff that wasn't really part of ISO 1 so that it's gone. And we get a more normal drawing now. And then if I hit, I'll hit the front view, which will zoom everything kind of like in the front view the way I want it. We were talking about those inferred constraints. You can see all of the ones that automatically put on when I was drawing. All right, so if you're looking for where they are, hide all constraints. It'll make those go away so you can see a little bit better. But finish 2D sketch. Go to save, or if you haven't saved it yet, go to File, Save As, but go to Save. That'll automatically save it. X out of it, and you're good. Now you can see inside of Isometrics 2, ISO 1 is sitting down here for me to open up next time. But other than that, if you have any questions, obviously come on up and ask. But otherwise, good luck.